let's go further through Europe. When we started, Jeroen, we briefly touched on that ambition in the Green Deal. Europe as a climate-neutral continent in 2050. Well, we're very honored that this morning we are also joined live by Daniel Mess. He's a member of the cabinet of Frans Timmermans of the European Commission, obviously who is pulling the Green Deal. And Daniel, we would love to learn a little bit more about you, how this rail transport and this momentum and this ambition that we're talking about this morning fits in the ambitions of the Green Deal. Daniel, good morning.
Good morning, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you very well. Glad that you're with us this morning. Making the transport sector more sustainable through decarbonization is an important element in the policy we can all read. Huh? Can you highlight and specify a bit the importance of rail in the context of the Green Deal?
I'm actually honored to be here because I saw that report that we're discussing, and I'm an admirer and bewonderaar of this work. Rail is absolutely crucial for the European Green Deal. I also like the fact that you saw from the audience that people feel some kind of almost impatience to get this done, and we share that. Of course, you need to do it right. It always takes time to do things in the rail sector, but we share the ambition. Rail is crucial for the European Green Deal because it's a climate-friendly way of transport, but also in times where, let's face it, post-corona, we have to rethink the way that we move around, and the transport sector, we need to rethink how to do things. So this also ties really to that bigger discussion. Rail is a safe way to travel. It's a sustainable way to travel. It's a way to travel where you can actually do something else while you're traveling. You can work. As a young student, you can look at your landscape and be excited about the city that you can visit. I'm now a father of 3 kids, and I can play I Spy with my little eye to entertain them, and have hopefully a Wi-Fi connection for Netflix, and my kids can move around a while. And rail has all of that. And then it makes you wonder, and you have to scratch yourself behind the head. We're also working for a politician like Frans Timmermans, but why don't we see that that's then growing by itself, passenger traffic? So this report asks exactly the right question, and also makes a key point. I truly believe that Europe is used to doing things like let's invest, let's take away barriers, and let's do operational standards. I think that this mandate in the Commission should be the mandate where we put indeed the passenger and what the passenger needs for better connections, better comfort, really give it the place that it deserves in the agenda.
Exactly. And if we dive one layer deeper, so we share the ambition and then we're supporting in the momentum, are there any specific proposals within the Green Deal that have an effect on the international passenger rail sector?
Because the Green Deal is, of course, about how do we also stimulate a climate-friendly way of travel, and rail is key in that. What I like also is the practical way to go about things. But the Green Deal is supposed to be about making these connections. So I like this thinking about let's just get together, bang heads together, and see how can I do better planning together with other people? How can I adjust my timetables? How can I not immediately invest in high-speed networks, but how can I upgrade stuff that we have and make sure that trains can drive quicker and get to their destination? That absolutely fits with the European Green Deal. It was not perhaps mentioned explicitly in the European Green Deal as we announced it in December 2019, but I can tell you right now that there will be follow-up in 2021 on exactly this issue, the passenger traffic. We're really committed to that, and it will also come back in the mobility strategy that, our plans for the mobility sector.
So Daniel, you're now feeding our news hunger, right? So it's almost 2021. Can you already kind of show us a slip of what we can expect then at that point, specifically for international passenger rail?
It's just interesting to see about all the things that are already being set in motion. I think that we should be a bit more optimistic about all of this when you see that we now have the reports, and parallel we indeed have ministers that sign political declarations that they want a comprehensive action plan for passenger rail, and that political declaration was a big success for Ms. van Veldhoven. It was signed by all the member states that actually have a rail network, so it's unanimous. That work will now start, and I believe that work should really be about, practical things. How do we improve the rail passenger traffic? and then feeding into follow-up by us. I leave it also to like other people on the call, because we also have the magnificent Elisabeth Werner on the call who can talk about all of this, which is also involved in that. But the point that I want to make is that we're really also on that. I think that if you look at, we've done massive investment in the rail sector in the past 20 years, 400 billion euros if you look at it in total. We've done our job at taking away barriers. We've done our job in seeking some kind of harmonization. I really think that ticketing, making it easier to book an international rail journey, something needs to be done by that. We cannot look away anymore from that. And that is something that I think we really should insist upon. And that will be a key focus, at least from my side. And
interesting. Yeah. Enough said. We read about between the lines, Daniel. Jeroen, you want to comment? Yeah.
Yeah, I think, Daniel, thanks. And in line with that, this report was, we started this pre-COVID. Mm-hmm. So then, of course, something happens and everybody starts asking, okay, is this still relevant? Mm-hmm. And I think Daniel was already noting that, especially now, there needs to be this focus on international rail. And as an optimist as I am, this is also the great opportunity, because we all need to figure it out again. Mm-hmm. There is no self-generating solution. So my question to Daniel is, are there initiatives within the European Green Deal context that actually look at this kind of opportunity, so to speak, of how can we really address these key issues for international rail, specifically because of the times we're in?
As you remember, like we were all like on rail freight already talking about, like, how can we improve the functioning of international rail freight and corridors. Now the passenger dimension is coming in. This is really all about a modal shift. My boss also said it yesterday at the press conference when he announced the climate target plan for 2030, so the new ambitions on climate, and he explicitly said, we're also facing times where, and that's just a reality. Okay, aviation plays a role in our mix. We cannot do without aviation either. But the aviation sector will need to become leaner and reshape itself. And we need to then talk about like what that means for rail. You see that in countries like Austria and Switzerland, there are cooperation between airlines and train operators selling tickets on each other's networks. That is a magnificent thing. And again, I'm really, really attached also in the context of the Green Deal of delivering for citizens in climate-friendly travel. And that booking is very important to me. I tested it actually myself on 2 of the routes that were mentioned in your report. I said, okay, imagine I want to travel from Assen to Paris, which is one of the routes where we see, rather than taking a plane, let's see, well, I can't do that from Assen, but let's see a bit like whether I can take the train. And that worked pretty well, actually. So I went on TrainLink. It's like, there's one connection in Rotterdam. Let's do that. But then when I tried the other route that was mentioned by Wijnand in his network, one of them, between Amsterdam and Prague, well, it looked very different when I got there. It was sort of like please travel to Hilversum, to Hengelo, to Bad Bentheim in Germany, and then go on. And let's face it, I'm not a young student anymore. I mean, I'm a father of 3 dads. When I look at that, I'm sort of like, okay, I need to have my buggy and my diapers, and I need to make sure that my kids stay on the platform. For me, that's a horror scenario to switch 5 times, not knowing whether I have rights as a passenger for the right connections, and something needs to be done there. And I have the feeling that if indeed, as when you look at issues, what would happen if there would be more data available, would that picture look different if I were to book that? Because boosting a transport mode should not be something that only exists on paper. It should be something that we do in a practical way, and for the passenger.
Yeah, well, thank you for sharing. And I think it's very true for this topic that we discussed today. Yes, on the one hand, we're talking about European governments working together in platforms that sound like they don't go quick enough. On the other hand, then you pointed out very well that is actually signed by everyone unanimously. So there is a lot of momentum. And at the same time, on a very practical level, most of us are train travelers, and most of us every now and then have the chance, do I go Amsterdam, Vienna by train or plane? And unfortunately, the train is not always yet competitive. So, Daniel, thank you for your first comments. Stay with us, because at the end, the last half hour of this program, we will have an interactive panel debate with input from our viewers and also from the other speakers in the call. So stay tuned. Thank you for now. Then we quickly move around in Europe, and I would like to introduce the Executive Director of the European Rail Infrastructure Managers, the EIM. Monika Heiming is with us. Monika, good morning.
Good morning.
Good to see you here on the screen. Well, you represent that bottom layer of the model that Jeroen introduced, the infrastructure. I guess we can only assume that stimulating international rail travel is something you really endorse, right?
Of course. More traffic, more income. So, and that's very, very simple. Yeah. Now, actually, we highly support the RLI initiative. It's easier to push it on paper than in reality, because what we see now is that international passenger traffic will naturally hit the same rocks or have to jump over the same obstacles as international rail freight. So that's an issue.
Yeah, and how does this proposal of the RLI about this corridor approach fit in with your own view of the sector? Does this land well within the infrastructural layer?
Well, we are not, I mean, we really support corridors. Corridors are still somehow a bit of a young breed. So we have still a bit of a, how to say, rodage to be done. We have a bit more senior corridors, we have more junior corridors, and it's interesting to see that the corridors at least respect the same base principles, but that still this innovation between the corridors can still take place. So we will never have the same approach to 100% between the different corridors. Mm-hmm. The corridors is a good thing if you have a lot of infrastructure. And in some countries, that's a little bit an issue. Either you extend the country or you go over or under the existing one. So in some countries which are a bit more crowded, like in the Netherlands, that will be a bit tricky, because I think it's over time a bit crowded in terms of capacity. So this is where actually we need, if we want to have an international corridor for passenger, great. Then we need to look into how we make this with, how do we realize this with existing capacity on the track.
Yeah, because can you elaborate on what it means for your members if we really start to implement these kind of corridors? Where does the friction start?
Oh, the friction is between, of course, we have national specificities. So like the same we have in rail freight. That's normal. I mean, we come out of more than 100 years of national thinking, and actually the agency, the railway agency, which we like quite a lot, is also a bit challenger of infrastructure managers. And Josef Doppelbauer loves rail infrastructure managers just for that point of for that aspect. Okay, I like you too. So we need, I mean, if we need to come along, but to give up national or regional or company rules, it's to explain this to a railway engineer is a big challenge. But we are working on that. So we have the issue log. It's not that we're not doing anything and just waiting that suddenly a rock is hitting our head. So rail infrastructure managers are, let's say, the hen and the egg. So we are the egg. And if you don't have rail infrastructure cooperating more in a more harmonized way, we're fully aware of that, you don't have any international train traffic, whatever it is, freight or passenger. We're aware of that.
Mm-hmm. So
for some to resume, for some it's more an opportunity, for others it's a bit more a challenge, but we are getting there.
Okay. We're getting there, yet at the same time, that's kind of the forbidden word in this context today, because we want to speed, there's urgency. What, in your view, is key for a successful implementation of this concept?
I think it's what we have seen in the past, let's say 10, 15 years, is a lot of regularity changes or legal changes. So we're now in the 4th railway package. I sometimes joke that we are heading for the 5th. I think so. But so it's a lot of changes introduced in a short period of time for railways. For other sectors would be normal. For railways is a bit of a challenge. And also to find the role between the national interest, and you raised it this morning, this is where you have to square the circle somehow. So the RLI approach, when I looked at the report, is quite interesting. So how much of a benefit do you create with an international, I mean, the cross-border section, which you're opening up? So it's not only in one country, but also in another country, and could be also in subsequent countries. So you have to create, of course, a market. And we are welcoming the approach, and we would like to be part of it. We need to be part of it. Without infrastructure, nothing is working. But of course, we need to, let's say, look also at operational procedures, and this is very, very complex. So we need to have a harmonized approach, both between all the infrastructure managers, but also vis-a-vis the railway undertakings, because their non-interoperability is the same issue.
Jeroen, you would like to add or question?
I think that's a great point, and I think one of the things we looked into on that operational side, we found, and we were told by some of the infrastructure managers that there's so much regulation between, like, for example, drivers that have to speak all the languages of the countries that you go through, or you cannot agree with one language, for example. Just interesting, very typical operational things. So my question would be, Monika, what kind of low-hanging fruit would you see if we would take a corridor that you think are like immediate things that we can look into and that improve certain and take away some barriers?
I think the key is traffic control management, or the traffic control centers. And we have already, this is a low-hanging fruit, because following Rastatt, so we managed to turn Rastatt into an opportunity a few years ago. We have the International Contingency Management Plan, which was somehow for us, let's say, almost like a little man landing on the moon. For others, was a big man landing on the moon. But we have that, and there is a much more exchange now. And we have, I've seen from also from our members that they apply this here and there. So there's a stronger exchange between the different operational staff, between the infrastructure managers. Now you can say, Monika, we don't see it. For you, it's a revolutionary act, but for us, we don't see that much. Yeah. But it's in its infancy. It's in a nutshell. But we also see, as I stated earlier, the issue log, and we also see the agency working on more recommendations on how could you do best, also related to within the scope of COVID, for example, give us a bit of a challenge and a proposal how we could do better and how we can align things. And for me, actually, low-hanging fruit would also be digitalization. If you look at the hardcore old-fashioned assets, that will take you ages, century. I will not be here, you neither, before that changes. But digitalization helps us to overcome all this and to have much more exchange on data. And that is really, for me, a low-hanging fruit.
Thank you for your very interesting comments and reflections, Monika. Stay with us to the end, where we have the full-on interactive panel with all of us. If you're joining us later, you have a question or a comment based on anything you've just heard, use the Slido application to send it to the studio, or give a thumbs up to a comment that you want to really promote to the top of the list. Then we move on to the next in our panel. We see Josef Doppelbauer with us, Executive Director of the European Union Agency for Railways, the ERA. Good morning, Josef.
Good morning. Yes. Warm welcome from Valencian. I hope you can hear me well.
We can hear you well. We can see you very clear. We've also asked you to reflect on the letter and the report that the Dutch Council has presented. You prepared a few slides for us. Can you please talk us through?
Well, first of all, I would like to thank RLI for their excellent work, and I was in discussion with them before they have distributed the report. And also based on what Daniel and Monika have just mentioned, I believe the opportunity for rail has never been greater than now. We have the European Green Deal, which is of course a reaction to the global climate crisis. We also should not forget that we still have a problem with transport safety. We are in the automotive area killing around 26,000 people every year. And now we have an opportunity to really create an attractive European railway system. And the study that has been published by RLI is a main factor to accelerate the development in that direction. Now, what is important is to make it happen and how to finance the transition to a modern European railway system. I indeed see a number of low-hanging fruits. The first one is we need to push ahead with the digitalization. And first and foremost, this means accelerating the ERTMS rollout. I also see an opportunity now to renew drastically rolling stock and to provide funding. Someone has mentioned in this context that we could consider a scrap fund like was done a couple of years ago for the automotive industry. We also shouldn't forget the infrastructure funding. We should not forget that there are still some cross-border stretches that are not so well supported, and we need to provide the appropriate financing, perhaps by increasing co-financing. And Monika has already alluded to it. We need to strengthen the cross-border traffic and capacity management. Also, Jeroen has continuously used the example of a train waiting at the station because the train doesn't get the free signal. If we switch to the next slide, I have summarized here a number of strategic statements which should address some of the key issues that we have if we want to improve. And we should not only improve, we have to drastically improve the European railway system in order to make it competitive. So the first statement is that we should come to a situation where we have no longer any technical or operational barriers. You mentioned the languages between the different countries, but there is still a number of other technical barriers. Certainly on this aspect, the corridor approach will help drastically. Then we have to continue working on increasing the safety and the security, both for the users of the railway system and the workers. And COVID has shown that it is necessary that rail is agile in responding to emergency situation. This agility will also be necessary if we think of natural catastrophes that are more and more frequent now because of the climate change. Digitalization will enable to integrate rail as the backbone of the multimodal transport system, which should then make rail seamless. And again, from a customer perspective, this would mean that Daniel can buy a good ticket and a good connection from Hasselt to Prague. With all these factors, we will make rail increasingly competitive as a mode, as a sector, and competition. I also understand in that direction that we have competition in the sector in a kind of open access mode. And all of this will finally lead that rail is the favored mode of transport. We already see it with the young generation, with the flight shaming movement, but it needs a lot of work and a lot of initiative from all actors to make the vision a reality. If we go to the next slide, there I come back to the main approach that we should look at the problem from the passenger's perspective. And obviously the passenger, when he decides which mode of transport he should take, he has a number of criteria. If you press one more on the next, then the animation should start, because now COVID has shown that there is absolute necessary condition, which is safety and security. So safety and security is the principal priority for passengers. If the passengers don't feel that the transport mode is safe and secure, they will decide for another option. Then there are, of course, the aspects that have to do with the value for money. It's the availability of a connection, and a connection that is feasible, not one where you have to change your train 5 times. Travel time and punctuality, the accessibility, the quality, and last but not least, the price. And here I have shown a comparison of prices between rail and flight. And unfortunately, there is still a very huge gap in the price levels between the low-cost airlines and the trains. All in all, it is the value for money, but it is also the dependability, meaning if trains are late and if trains are cancelled, then the quality does not meet the expectations of the customer. And should there be an emergency situation, and we hear it all the time from passenger surveys, accurate and immediate passenger information is enormously important in order to drive customer satisfaction. Now on that background, if we move to my final slide, I show you a number of actions which are also more or less in line with what has been proposed by RLI and which has also been mentioned in the document of the Dutch ministry. We need to develop the European high-speed network, and we need to possibly start by connecting the major cities in Europe. Another aspect that is important is to connect the railway network to the main airports. If you look into the top 10 connections in Europe that have the highest number of flight passengers, you see that in almost all cases, the respective airports are not well connected to the train network. In the Netherlands, Schiphol is of course directly connected with an airport, but for instance, in Germany, neither Berlin, Munich, nor Hamburg have a connection of the train network, of the high-level train network to the airport. The European network of night trains is also very important as a complementary offer to the daytime high-speed trains, but we still have a lot to work to eliminate inefficiencies on the railway network, both in the infrastructure, we have still some bottlenecks, but also in terms of operational procedures, having to change the local driver at the border because of language barriers. So this all lead to a strategy for the industrial policy for rail, because it needs to be a European approach, and we need to go away from the current approach that is focused on the respective national priorities. Finally, we believe, and it has been mentioned before, that capacity of the railway system and the traffic coordination needs to be managed at the European level, with a first step notably being the corridor management. And finally, all of this will not be possible without significant investment in the railway project, perhaps with a better coordination of the various projects. So with all of this, I am a true believer that we can shape a future of railway transport to provide a safe, connected and affordable railway system, which has a minimum environmental footprint and brings us towards a green Europe. So this is my views, which I believe are very well aligned with the study that we are discussing today.
Yes, thank you very much, Josef Doppelbauer. And indeed, that was the key question. How do the views align? And it seems that they're very much aligned. Thank you for sharing the perspective of the ERA. And stay with us as well for the final panel debate. We're heading over to the Executive Director of the Community of European Railway and Infrastructure Companies, Libor Lochman. Libor, good morning. Your members are representing 92% of the passenger rail operations in Europe. So definitely you represent basically all the players in this field. Let's validate first quickly our ambition. Are you also aligned with that stimulating European or international passenger rail is really beneficial and that we should all put our shoulders to that?
Thank you very much. In fact, I will start from a slightly broader perspective. We can go straight to the next slide. I mean, that's what you have seen already on the screen before. So that we are representing, yes, as you said, the majority of the passenger operating companies, but since we are really the system, I would say, association representing the railway here in Brussels vis-à-vis the policymakers, we take care also of the freight operating companies, and obviously the infrastructure as well. So whatever we do, we always have to see the system benefits at the first place as a priority. Now, from that sense, so I would not start talking purely about the corridors only. So we can switch to the next slide, please. Because for me, what is essentially is the complete single European railway area. And I know you mentioned that you like the abbreviation. So you have the first one here, the SERA or SERA, which is the single European railway area. And that's something which is embedded in the regulation. And it's something that if you wish to see any improvement of the rail sector in Europe, this is what has to deliver at the first place. Because then consequently, we will be able to offer the high quality customer-oriented services. What we need, however, is also the level playing field across all the transportation modes. And I will come back in my next slide as well, because we have to see the potential of the railway in the entire complexity. Of course, what we are going to do from our side, this is the continuous effort of being the safest mode. And now, if I just link to what Josef said a few seconds ago, it's safety, but also in the future, we will have to take care of the health and safety due to the COVID infection or pandemic. We have to take care of the offers for all the passenger segments, including the high level of the automation and customer-oriented businesses to improve the customer experience. Also through the ticketing. I fully agree with that, what has been said in the previous by the previous speakers. We have to improve the service for the customers, starting from the ticketing one. We have an instrument for that, which is called the full service model. So you have yet another abbreviation here, but it is a special technical basis on which we can build our future communication with the customers efficiently. If you switch to the next one, this was the sector. Now I connect to what Daniel has been explaining. We have a huge expectation from the intention of the European Union to become the first zero economy by 2050. So really that the Green Deal is going to deliver. And the Green Deal can only deliver if the rail is going to play an essential role in that. Not only, of course, in the context of the international services, but in general. And where we have to improve all variety of the framework conditions that I said before. So we have to have essential conditions for improvement of the cross-border interoperability. And believe or not, even though that we mostly share the very same track route, they are still far from enjoying the same conditions on the various sides of the border. We have to improve also the multimodal connectivity. That's why the railroad connectivity is mentioned again. But now if we talk about the Green Deal and to make the rail attractive, that's what I said previously, we have to set also the conditions right across the modes. So the implementation of the polluter pay and user pay principles should help us to attract the customers to the rail services more nationally as well as internationally. What we have to do then on the side of the infrastructure is further improving the connectivity, electrifying the tracks, increasing the speed, digitalizing the railways, and also exploring the potential of how to attract the private investors into that. And last but not least, and this is what again needs to be well connected, not only through the Green Deal, but also the budget of the Union, is the funding for the research and innovation. We have to improve a lot, and we need to invest into the research innovation as well. So that will be about the Green Deal. Now, the next will be what we expect, and the next slide, please. So what we expect from another abbreviation, and I really try to meet expectation about having a lot of the abbreviations here, European Union Strategy for Smart and Sustainable Mobility. We have to start from the infrastructure. And this is not, this future strategy for the sustainable mobility that is going to be presented by the Commission end of the year, and I'm sure that Elisabeth Werner will tell us even more, is kind of the follow-up of the previous white papers. And the white paper said already, or the 10T regulation said that we need to have the high-speed network. If you talk about the improvement of the international corridors for passenger services, it's not going to work with the high-speed network. So we need to have the completion of those essential infrastructures as quickly as possible. And of course, we have to eliminate the missing list and transport bottlenecks, because you will never have a good, attractive connections across the border if you still have the missing links as we have today. Plus, and that's again about the multimodal connectivity, we will not be able to serve the customers door to door without having perfect connections to the other alternative modes from our terminals and the stations. So the infrastructure. Of course, we do not stop at infrastructure, so we move to the next slide, please. Because if we deal with infrastructure, we have a number of services, and your 4-layer model is in fact showing that very clearly, that we need to have the services on the train and with the train, and then also the auxiliary services on the passenger side. So if we achieve the infrastructure, or we reach the infrastructure that allow us to be competitive with regards to the speed and with regards to the quality of service for the distances up to 1,000 kilometers, so being competitive vis-a-vis the private cars, but mainly without the short-haul flights, we can be partially winning the case. Then, of course, we need to improve the ticketing, and we need to be also connected throughout the multimodal offers. So that's why the mobility as a service is going to play an essential role. And last but not least, if we talk about the cross-border international rail services, we definitely wish to be also fully accessible. So serving not only, I would say, the classic customers, but also the passengers with reduced mobility. So this is our challenge that is standing and ahead of us. And we believe that your concept of the corridors with our concept of what needs to be promoted through the new strategies and the commitment of the state and the companies can really be very productive. And if it is, and that will be my last slide in fact now, if it is like that, then we achieve our huge challenge. And the huge challenge is that to double the modal share of the passenger traffic to achieve the level of at least 15% by 2030 and 20% by 2050, in which obviously, again, the international passenger services must play an essential, crucial role. So with that, thank you for the opportunity to contribute. I believe that, again, your approach and the approach of the Dutch government or the Dutch Ministry for Transport and Water Management is perfectly aligned, and we have a lot to do together with the other member states and together with all the stakeholders. Thank you.
Thank you, Libor Lochman, for your first reflections. We'll get back to you also during the panel debate. For the sake of time, we promised our viewers in the timetable below that would start at 11:30, but we will delay that a little bit because we haven't heard from our last panelist yet. So stay tuned, Libor. I'd like to introduce our last panelist, who was already referenced by Daniel Mess, Elisabeth Werner, Director of Land Transport of the European Commission, Directorate General MOVE. Elisabeth, good morning.
Good morning. Good
Yes.
morning. Thank you very much. It's a very lively event, and it was very interesting to listen. It's very timely also as we stand ahead of 2021, the European Year of Railways. And I think that's exactly the type of discussions and events that we would like to do for the next 12 months as well. Yeah. For the European Commission, cross-border rail is of course central. I mean, for us, the cross-border, the international aspect is our bread and butter. We want to have the free movement of people, the free movement of goods, and the free movement of services, meaning the same companies can provide everywhere in Europe. And with COVID and the Green Deal, there is a sense of urgency. There is a lot of impatience for rail to deliver. I can only agree with what Daniel has said. In the RLI report, what I was really focusing on is the 4 layers, and you presented the 4 layers again at the beginning. In my reflection, I wanted to look at those and see a bit also what Europe has done or where more should be done. You have the basic layer, the infrastructure layer, and we have the trans-European networks, our basic infrastructure layers in place for quite a while. I'll try to show you briefly what this looks like from our point of view, multicolored and very nicely linking main ports, main cities, and of course, essentially airports. We will
if you can just have a printout. Just Elisabeth, quick question. What do the different colors mean in this visual?
The different colors mean the different corridors that we have in place.
Okay.
All of these corridors are multimodal. Okay. So you'll find passenger rail on all of those. Many of it is actually high-speed rail. Yeah. I just wanted to show you this as a teaser because in the next months and certainly in the next year, we want to show a map when these connections, when this infrastructure is finally built by 2030, which is the deadline that was agreed with the member states, what railway connections will become possible, how they will become more attractive, because the connecting time is down and you have the infrastructure in place. So that's the bottom layer of the infrastructure. You had on top of that the second layer, and that was the rail traffic management. There we have something that we, and you like abbreviations, I'm sure, we call the European Rail Traffic Management System. Mm-hmm. And we've been trying to roll that out for a long, long time to make sure the trains are safely moving on these corridors and that we get the maximum out of this infrastructure that is in place. And here that's very important that you have the same system everywhere in Europe, because that's what makes rail complicated and expensive when the train has to stop at the border, switch to a different traffic management system, or even be equipped with several systems at the same time. So here we want to move to a single European system. The concept is in place. Again, our deadline is 2030 because Jeroen is absolutely right. That doesn't move very quickly if you speak about infrastructure, hard infrastructure, or digital infrastructure. Then you have the transport services. And I understand this third layer is essentially being the one about the trains and of course the railway companies operating. And it was already said by previous speakers as well, we have a fourth railway package, and that railway package needs to be implemented. It means you get rid of all the national differences in the rule book of the different technical standards, but it also means that the same railway company can deliver a service everywhere in Europe. So it's the same train being able to operate and the same company being able to operate everywhere in Europe. It also has these rules about what are the conditions for providing subsidies to the companies so that we really have a level playing field in place. And then you have this upper layer. And I think it's the upper layer that we really, really should focus on very strongly in the next few years. This is where it's the services and the interface with the passengers. And this is where the digitalization brings a fundamental change to the game that we have here. We want to move to mobility as a service. And we also, of course, want to connect the railway with the rest of the transport systems. You'd want to move as a passenger door to door, and you don't want to live in the railway station, even if you want it to be reasonably close here. So this is where I think a lot of our focus needs to be in the next years. And this is the ticketing, and it was mentioned, and it is very central, and we will want to do some improvements there. It is simply not acceptable that for airlines, you can find very many platforms that offer you this. But for railways, you have to have a pretty good idea of what you want before you can actually manage to buy a ticket. It's also, I think, the question of the suitable rolling stock, that when a company wants to enter the market, it shouldn't need to wait for a long, long time to find the trains. And it's, of course, timetabling, because it's timetabling that makes a connection attractive, and especially when it's international, that's currently very bothersome. So here what I think is that we have a lot of European initiatives on the lower levels, and we need to put our attention more on the upper levels, because you need to act at the corridor level, you need to act at the network level, you need to act at the European level. And I very much look forward, of course, to all the political support that we now have to get these things actually put in practice, closing once again with that sense of impatience that was already expressed. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Elisabeth Werner. Your impatience really comes through this to the screen. You're very passionate. Last question before we start a panel debate. I'd like to know, so what can the DG Move do to help all the others? Because we seem to be pretty much aligned on the ambition and the urgency. So what can you do from your perspective to actually help achieve these first corridor coordination projects, or this launching customer, as Wijnand referred to it?
We will certainly continue from the side of the European Commission to put our money where the mouth is and co-finance some of these projects, especially on the infrastructure and on the digital side. It is very often the cross-border projects that need that a little additional co-financing because they are less of an interest to the national capitals than they should be for the European network as a whole. We will continue to see that the legislative framework is in place for the companies and for that market to function very well. So we will both be vigilant that it's properly implemented, but we will also, where necessary, make additional proposals. And we have several corridor relevant initiatives in mind for the work program. Last but not least, I think we need more opportunities like this one to have a discussion on where the obstacles are, because it's the fundamental demand of the passengers that will raise the volume, as you said at the beginning, the volume for the international connections to be more central to the preoccupations also of the politicians who decide and would help us to abolish all the different obstacles that remain for rail to function truly on a European scale.
Thank you, Elisabeth. Powerful comments. And I would say let's get started. We come to the end of our round of first reflections. It's time for the panel debate.